Hello and welcome to another episode of The Bike Shed, a weekly podcast from your friends at thoughtbot about developing great software. I'm Aji Slater.
And I'm Sally Hall. And together we're here to share a bit of what we've learned along the way.
So, Sally, what's new in your world?
Very non-tech related, but this is my handmade holiday sweater debut.
Amazing.
Wearing for the first time, which I'm very excited about. It only took me 14 months to make.
Wait, so you made that yourself?
I made this. I'm very proud of it. I made it using a pattern from this company called Pacific Coast Knits, I think, and they do what they call doodles, which is very fun. You get a base pattern, and then they make all these different sets of doodle cards, which are like little color work patterns, and you can combine them in different ways to make a sweater or a scarf or a hat or whatever. So not only did I make this, I designed it. Design is in quotes, because I took the little cards that they had and planned out exactly which motif would go where.
Wow.
Which is, I think, a very fun way to knit.
Yeah, that seems like a fun way to do a lot of different creative projects. Now, for the listeners who aren't able to see the sweater, I think I've lost a little bit of detail because as you get closer, I can see more about it. But it's kind of a blue base.
It's blue. Yeah, and it's a Fair Isle sort of type thing where the yoke is different patterns. The most visible of which are holly leaves and snowflakes and candy cane stripes.
Candy cane stripes. Nice. I wonder if that's named after Fair Isle in Scotland.
It is.
Right. Great.
Yeah, there's so much history to that, but that is not what this podcast is.
That is not this, but yeah. Absolutely. Well, it looks amazing.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying it. And it is a, quote, snow day here in North Carolina, which means it might snow, so everything is closed. So it feels like an appropriate day to do that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's new in your world, Aji?
Actually, what's new in my world is I've been thinking about a couple of things from the last episode that I recorded with Joelle.
Oh, I haven't heard that yet, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think actually, so it hasn't gone out at the time that we are recording. So, but I'm sure we have gotten a lot of letters because I said something in the episode that is not true. We were talking about how cosmic rays can flip bits in computers.
Okay.
And, this is a thing that does happen, and I mentioned
you said this is not a thing I know, but keep going.
That there was a speed runner on streaming on Twitch or something playing a Mario game, and something incredible happened, and the main running theory was that a cosmic ray had flipped one of the bits in the ongoing process of the game. And it turns out that's probably not true. But into, kind of digging into the whole world of that after I said a thing and then immediately after the episode found out that it was wrong, still fascinated by the fact that that does happen. Like, that is a thing that just happens. You can't really protect against it as a normal computer user, and every now and then the universe will just flip one of your bits.
The universe will just be like, you thought you knew everything and had control, but no.
Exactly.
I find that strangely comforting. We can do everything right, and I don't know, maybe it's more that I like having something to blame. It works on my machine. There must be a cosmic ray. I don't know.
Yeah, the fact that you can do everything right and still sometimes fail can be either incredibly depressing or very grounding.
Yeah, a little both, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been thinking about is that we didn't mention that this is the second season of The Bike Shed. So while this is not the first episode of the second season of The Bike Shed, welcome everybody to the second season of this new format of The Bike Shed.
We could pretend like we did that on purpose. It's the second episode of the second season.
Oh, that's good. Now I need to write that down to make sure we do it on the third episode.
We will definitely forget. That's okay.
100%. And that is quite all right. We'll go right along into the topic that we have decided to talk about here. And that is, I have titled ActiveModel Everywhere. Is there anything that makes you think of when you just hear that phrase?
I feel like it makes ActiveModel sound more exciting than it usually does. But yeah, I guess I think my first reaction is, ooh, interesting, tell me more. Because I feel like whenever I'm working in a class in Ruby that does not include ActiveModel, I kind of wish I was,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. I think that's exactly what this is sort of referring to. And it's a little, I don't know, mantra that I've been following maybe. Whenever I'm starting up a new service object, let's just say, although I think that term is a little unnecessary in general, if there's something in a Rails system that doesn't fit into a database table backed model, the way that we usually think about model, an active record model, we'll call it like a service object or something like that, or just use a poro, which is a plain old Ruby object. But I would advocate to think about reaching to include some of ActiveModel every time that you do that. A couple of reasons why I like that. You can create a consistent API across all of the little objects that are in your system that are talking together. That way, a controller that is acting on a non-database table backed object will still look by and large the same sort of shape as all your other controllers, and you can have this kind of consistent clarity of thought at a high level across the different paths through your application. And also, it gives you so much for free and so much like robust, well-tested things that you already trust to use in your system for your active record models. But you can, without having to rewrite something like validators or attributes or different things like this, the ways they get instantiated, you've got a kind of robust system backing up each of these things that are common things to have to do in these types of classes.
Yeah, that I'm now remembering a time a few years ago when I did do this, and it ended up being really helpful, which I don't know. I guess before I jump into the time I did it, I would like to hear about where you're doing it these days to see if I'm using ActiveModel the same way before I go down a tangent that is entirely not what you were wanting to talk about. I'm going to do that anyway, but you can talk about yours first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think lately there was a conversation in Slack that kind of brought this top of mind in the thoughtbot Slack. Someone was asking about making a new controller, and it didn't map exactly to one of the active record models, and it had some kind of cross-cutting concerns, and we were kind of going back and forth until someone came in and just hit the nail on the head that try to think of everything in your Rails app as a resource. And as soon as you're thinking about it as a thing, as a resource in your domain, then all of those sort of behaviors that you get from ActiveModel make a whole lot of sense and become really useful. I've been using that just today to make a class that is, let me see what I called it. It's about adding some default associations to a record. So the action that we needed to take is that this one record can have a bunch of different associations. It needs to have some associations. They might be custom, they might be special, but by and large, when they first enter the system, they're going to get a default set. And so while we're using administrate, one of the ways that we wanted to make this easier for someone setting up a new record in the system is we'll give them a button to just add all the default themes. Right, so we're attaching themes to this model. You can also use it in a has many kind of multi-select dropdown like usual if you have something specific that this is going to require. And so the resource that I thought of was default themes. And so you are creating and saving a set of default themes. And so thinking about the RESTful actions and the kind of active record API methods that you use to persist things, because we're going to persist something. So I made a .save on my default themes class so that the controller looks exactly like a Rails controller, and everyone will be familiar with kind of what the flow is and everything just right off the bat looking at it.
But this .save is not writing to a database table.
It is, but not in the way that active record models usually would, because it is calling out to an active record model, saving there, making an association through a join table. So there is persistence to a database, but it's not the .save that you would get from an active record object.
So it's not like a one-to-one. Now we've got a table called database theme, and we're writing a new record to it that is just its own thing.
Exactly. Okay. So you'll pass in that original resource, and then it will query for all of the default type associations, join them together, and either give you back errors or a success.
Yeah, that does sound useful. And it's sort of like the idea of, other pieces of the app that will be interacting with this not really needing to care or know about the implementation details. Like, is this saving to an active record the way we are used to or not? It doesn't really matter. Like, I just know what I need, what I can and need to do with this class, and whether it writes to a database in the normal way or doesn't write to a database at all, or, I don't know, draws it in crayon using a robot arm. It's not really relevant to how I'm going to use it.
Right. It is taking whatever the idea of persistence is for this particular object and doing that, right?
Yeah.
But that's still not even really including any of ActiveModel. That is kind of like following the ActiveModel and Active Record API.
Right.
The other things that I'm using in this are attributes and validations. And those are the ones that I find that I'm using most often, because attributes sets out all of that nice instantiation where you just the name of the attribute and then pass in your thing, and ActiveModel will take care of saving that to an instance variable and everything. And then the validation is, if we're going to do a persistence, we want to make sure that we have something that's going to work, right? Or we want to have nice, usable Railsy type errors, if not. And that's what you get with the validation. You get all the validators in there. So presence, true, uniqueness, all of those things that you might be using everywhere else. You can also use those on your non-active record models.
Right. So I was working on an application where we needed to get data from a third-party database that we could connect to. I can't remember the details, but basically couldn't do it the normal way. And it had started out as just a straight Ruby application. On reflection, I wish I had used ActiveModel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was building what I thought was going to be, just a little one-off Ruby only app that just like gets some data for us from this third-party database that we have permission to query but not write to.
Okay.
Or no, we could write to it, but only certain tables. It was a weird situation. And so I started out just sort of like making some plain old Ruby objects and using them to sort of, real quick, just give me this data, and then I'll go send it over to this other place where it's just a whole Rails app where I'll use it. And when I got to testing, I realized, oh my God, this is awful. Now I have to write all of these little helper things myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I couldn't use a lot of the testing gems that I'm used to, like the way that I'm used to using them. Like when I went to just set up some fake data, FactoryBot was no longer just like there and waiting and excited for me. And so it was, and I'm going to say this was many years ago, and I have learned lessons. And I would like to think I would have approached this differently from the beginning now. But as I went through and started trying to test things and set up fake data and just validate stuff, I realized that all of the things I love and use about ActiveModel all the time are really hard to reproduce on your own. And why would you?
Right.
So Yeah, I wish that you had told me ActiveModel everywhere like 4 years ago. I can't imagine why you didn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, but it's like I just kind of assumed we don't have our own database. This is just a little like, let's fetch some data, squish it a little bit and bring it back. We don't need all of that. And then it's kind of like, well, but you've got several classes that are just trying to represent a real world concept as a collection of data. Why wouldn't you use ActiveModel? That's kind of what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little bit along the lines of, I know there are a lot of projects out there that include active support, but aren't using Rails because they want all of that, all of those syntactic sugar and kind of helpers and things that you have in Rails that are, honestly, those are the parts that are hard to tell apart from Ruby sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what's in active support and what's in the standard library. But yeah, these little modular bits of Rails that you can include outside of a Rails application to get a lot of this functionality that you're using day to day.
Yeah, it's something it's not really a way that I think about Rails very often as like a thing you can pick and choose bits from. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice apparently.
Sorry.
I think of it as like, okay, it's this framework and we're going to use it or we're not going to use it. And usually we're going to use it. But really, the more I learn about it and the more I get into details, realizing that you can just like extract the bits that you need and that they're all actually packaged up pretty nicely for you to do that.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't have to be full on Rails or just plain old Ruby. It can be like Ruby plus active support, Ruby plus ActiveModel.
Yeah, that is also for me not a way that I usually think about Rails. There was, oh god, I'm doing it again.
Are you about to talk about a keynote?
Yeah, there was one of Eileen's keynotes where she was describing the kind of architecture of Rails and talking about these different parts as being little units that all kind of get piled up together and work together. And that was where I learned the difference between active something and action something.
Oh, I actually don't know that difference. Would you tell us?
Yes. So if it's, let me make sure I'm getting this right, active record. Okay, yes. If it's active something, it's going to happen more on the back end, and it's action something, it's going to happen more on the front end.
Oh. Wow. Okay. I'm thinking through, right? Action mailer. That's kind of.
Yeah, because it's going outside of Rails. It's sending a mail away.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Is that a hard and fast rule or a convention or just a pattern? And wow, what even is the difference between those things now?
Yeah, I think I don't know that if there's anything hard and fast like written down that defines that, but I do know that it is something that the Rails team is like thinking of. It's certainly a convention at the very least. This was also where she had described active and action, and then a few minutes later in the talk was talking about being more involved in Rails and the community. And she says you can take an active role, and that's when I wanted to make a gem and add it to Rails that would do roles and permissioning. So. That's I don't think I'm going to get around to that. So that is an idea I'm throwing out there for free for everybody in the audience.
Yeah. If you make it, we're going to make you come talk about it with us.
Ooh, there you go.
Yeah. This is actually, I'm going to tie this back. This makes me now think about the way that I built my sweater, right? That Rails has all these bits and pieces, and you can use the whole thing as like just here's a predefined pattern, make the sweater. Yeah. Or you can take the bits you need and put them together in the order that you need and make it pretty and make it be exactly what you need it to be. Look at that.
Yeah.
Crafting comes back again.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I guess we think about Rails as being monolithic because your average web application is going to use a lot of, if not most of those parts kind of just in the process of being a web application, right? Yeah. So we don't have to pick and choose very often, but you can bring things in where they aren't already and get more use out of them, like bringing an ActiveModel. So I should have done this like an episode of the Tightly Coupled podcast where I read through the guides of ActiveModel beforehand. So I would have more of these specifics to talk about, but there are things like callbacks and attributes we already talked about, validators, which come in ActiveModel API. There's like dirty checking, all of these different things that are kind of pieces of Rails models that you can pull in as needed. And so you don't even need to pull in everything to the class that you're making, just the one part that you're going to be making use of. Serializers, that's another one too.
So if we're doing ActiveModel everywhere, what else could we be doing in more places than we are?
Well, we talked a little about active support outside of Rails. You can certainly use Active Record on its own to work with a database, but that's not taking a piece of Rails and using it elsewhere in Rails.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Rails guide index, hoping that there would be another place where it'd be like, here's a thing you can do.
Yeah, I don't know that I've reached around too much, because I feel like at the moment, at least, ActiveModel kind of scratches all the different itches for functionality that I've needed. And thinking about these objects as resources, as models, even if they're not backed by a database table, you can overwrite certain methods that get clued off on to, say, include them in views. Like to partial path, you overwrite or make from scratch, and you can have your object work with your views as a partial in the same way that any other kind of typical Rails model object would. And I find that, much like staying close to Rails's conventions as far as the way you're going to implement something or the methods that you might choose to use going day to day, keeping the same sort of similar API of model, view, and controller, keeping those consistent and Railsy all the way through makes reasoning about your application a lot easier, because you're not having to remember all of these different special cases. Right, everything kind of looks like Rails all the way up and down.
This is making me think about something that I've been thinking about recently, is the number of things that I don't really know where they're from, and I just use them. Like, I've been doing a lot of React and JavaScript recently, as I may or may not have mentioned. And so, when you're building an application there and you want to reach for something that's not in the standard library, you've got to know where it's coming from and import it explicitly.
Right.
And there's so much in Rails and in Ruby that I just use without thinking about where it comes from. And I don't actually know. Is this a Ruby thing? Is this a Rails thing? Is this ActiveModel? Is this active support? Is this, I just kind of take for granted that those tools will be there and don't think very hard about where they come from.
Yeah.
But I've been kind of wanting to get a better understanding of, like, when I'm reaching for something, where am I reaching for it? Like, where is it coming from? Is this a Ruby thing? Is this a Rails thing? Is this a gem that I use so often that I install it on every project, but I've forgotten it's not actually Rails?
Right.
Factory bot. And I feel like part of the Rails magic is that you don't have to know that.
Right.
But the more time I spend in Rails, the more I kind of do want to know. Which was the thing I liked about mentioning the Tightly Coupled podcast again. I did enjoy sort of digging into the, what's actually going on behind the scenes, and what does this do, and how's it all come together? But do you ever wonder about that? Do you have a better grasp of that than I do, or?
I think this kind of falls into the similar situation to most everything that I've learned as about developing software. Is I know the ones that I've had to dig into to make something work. But just kind of recreationally exploring what's out there. I have not done as much. And that's something that I think Rails sort of encourages in a way too, right? You don't have to know how this works as long as the standard thing is going to get your work done for you. And then
Right.
you can dive more deeply when you have the need for it, right? That's part of Rails magic, Rails productivity. So no, I know a couple of them, but knowing all of the ways that the sort of tendrils of these little packages work together, that kind of greater subway metro map of Rails is not something that I have a whole lot of light on.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of thinking of it as like a subway map.
Yeah.
Just like visualizing how all these things come together. I was just thinking, ooh, this might make like a fun little game where you have to like, here's a method or a class that you use all the time. Do you know where it comes from?
Ooh, interesting.
Fun, or I don't know. My definition of fun might be weird.
Well, we do have our end of the year thoughtbot hackathon coming up, so maybe this is something that someone will want to put together and release. And if that does happen, we'll talk about it again on the bike show.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a little game like that when I was an early career dev that was asking about, it would give you a list of 10 methods and would ask, is this from Ruby or is this from Rails? And myself and a bunch of other early career devs took it and, did not really well because we hadn't had to dig into like, where do these come from very much. And a manager I had that was a really fantastic guy, but he came over and sort of pointed and laughed at all of us because he had gotten a better score just by randomly guessing true or false or like Ruby or Rails than the people, and he didn't know Ruby or Rails, and so he got a better score than the rest of us because we were overthinking everything.
I hope that still exists, and you can send me the link and we can share it.
I will. Yes, I will try to find that.
Yeah, because that's pretty much exactly what I was thinking. Is this Ruby or is this Rails? But maybe more in depth. And then there are some things that are both, right? Like you can. I hope I'm not making this up, but there are some, methods that are defined in Ruby and then defined differently in a part of Rails. Maybe.
I don't know any off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah. Okay. Thought experiment. Homework for listeners. Do those exist? Share them with us. Do they not exist and I'm ridiculous for thinking they are? Share that with us too, but nicely.
Is there something super obvious that you're all shouting at your podcast player right now that we can't think of?
Yeah. I would say in my defense, and I don't know if you have this, Aji. Well, no, I know that you don't. It is Monday morning for me. So my brain is still gearing up. Yeah. You over here in Scotland have had a whole day to remember everything you've ever known about programming.
Right, because that's how that works.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go put ActiveModel some places outside of this podcast.
I'm going to put ActiveModel in my next sweater.
Amazing. I can't wait.